Learning a foreign language is no easy task, and it becomes harder the more the language you learn differs from your native language. But there are some tools that you can use to make the job easier.
우리는 먼 훗날 다시 만날 것을 약속했다.
And if you start having some fun with it, it will feel more like a hobby than a chore. And let me tell you, I know this from hard experience. I mean, I've learned a number of languages in a number of different settings, and because of both my successes and failures, I have an understanding of what works and what doesn't. So let me tell you a little bit about my story first. Well, I started out with German, which I learned 22 years ago at the Missionary Training Center in Provo, Utah. Now, it was while I was in Germany that I started to learn Chinese, believe it or not. However, my formal training in Chinese largely came at Brigham Young University. And a few years after I graduated, I studied Korean at the Foreign Service Institute in Arlington, Virginia. Well, I'm going to tell you a secret though. Those classes that I took really were not all that helpful in the end. You see, learning a foreign language depends a lot on the effort that you put into it. If you're motivated, if you've got a system that works, if you've got access to a native speaker or two, you can make a lot of progress faster than you think. That's what I learned after I started to learn languages on my own outside of the classroom setting. The thing is that a formal language class alone is not going to magically teach you a language. You need a way to get your language learning into your long-term memory. And you need an incentive to feel motivated to actually spend time learning the language. Now, I can't give you the incentive. That's got to come from deep inside you. But what I can do is I can tell you the approach that I take these days. Now, this has changed over time, and it's still kind of evolving as I continue to make mistakes and run into whatever roadblock it is. But based on my prior successes and failures, this is really the general approach I take for every language I want to learn from now on. Now, the first thing I recommend doing right from the start is using a program like Anki. You'll want to create your own cards right from the beginning. Programs like Anki help because they help you organize your own learning. And the spatial repetition algorithm helps you keep what you learn in your long-term memory. Of course, Anki is not the only software out there. You can use whatever it is that you want. The nice thing about Anki though is that it's free and it's very easy to customize. But you really need to use at least something. I strongly recommend using some sort of computerized system if nothing else. I say this because I know from experience that having like huge stacks of index cards just doesn't work. Review becomes impossible, and then you eventually start to relearn the same thing you learned before without knowing it because you didn't look at that card for like a couple weeks or months or whatever. Programs like Anki will help prevent those problems. Before you jump in, I do recommend listening to the language for a little bit to sort of see how things sound, get a sense for the rhythm, and so on. Some language textbooks will offer pronunciation guides. However, I only recommend using the ones that actually have native speaker audio, on CDs, MP3s, or whatever. And even then, you're probably going to be better off looking for beginner guides on YouTube rather than messing around with really confusing textbook explanations. And if you're learning something like Vietnamese, there are a ton of content creators to choose from. And there's another point here. You want to try to make sure that you pick a language to learn that is not so obscure that it's impossible. So for example, I've wanted to learn the Suzhounese dialect of Chinese for years. They speak it down in Suzhou, it's a variant of Wuyu, but I haven't. The reason why is not because it's too hard, it's not because I don't have the ability, it's because I haven't been able to find good enough resources, even in Chinese. So the nice thing about the bigger languages is that there tends to be a lot more resources for those languages out there. Now, if you're learning in a classroom setting, you're probably going to use a textbook of some sort. However, even if you're learning on your own, you really should start out with a textbook. I strongly recommend getting a textbook series that has an audio component as well, especially when you're starting out. The nice thing is that you can combine the written exercises and recordings with Anki to create a good learning environment for yourself. Now, you will need to go slowly, and you should do all the practice questions and the problems that the book gives you. What you don't want to do is you don't just want to skip through things and figure that your repetition software will get you to learn it in the end. Remember, you want to learn and understand the language as best as you can, not just memorize some vocabulary words. And on to the memorization front. Notice that I'm not telling you here to go download a list of the most common words right up front and memorize those. I know that there are people who say to do that. I wouldn't recommend it. I also do not recommend to go download a bunch of pre-made decks for Anki or for whatever other software it is. Now, you can do that sort of thing. You will learn some things, but it will be more meaningful for you and it will last longer and you'll be more motivated if you come up with a system designed for you that works for you. One of the most difficult things about language acquisition is that things don't necessarily translate directly into your native language. So check out this old blog post by Danny Crichton. Crichton started out with a false belief. He concluded that a single Korean word equaled a single word in English. So when he came across a word like sosu, a noun that has different meanings depending on the context, he decided to stick all of the possible meanings on the same Anki card. And this is what he came up with. Now, this violates SuperMemo's minimum information principle. Basically, this principle tells you that you need to trim complex things down to a simple format in order to truly learn and understand it. And that's not as easy as you think. So the trick here is to use full phrases and full sentences to learn words like sosu in context. Now, fortunately, Korean learners can take advantage of the Naver online dictionary, which is the best out there and which is free. So after you search for sosu, you can see the English definitions and the different hanja, and then look at the examples button. So if you click through to the examples, you will see multiple example sentences come up. Well, and then comes the easy part of selecting the example sentences that you want, sticking them in your Anki deck, and then you use something like HyperTTS to add audio to those sentences. It'll be computerized audio, sure, that's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. You see, you really want to learn words in the context of the language. You don't just want to learn separate words, and you don't want to have words where on the backside you have like 20 different definitions and they're slightly different from each other. Anyway, the same thing goes for grammar as well. To learn grammar, I use special Anki cards that highlight certain grammatical particles in phrases and sentences. I made these cards myself. In fact, I even cheat for myself and give myself the definition of the phrase or the sentence on the front side. This way, I'm only tested on the grammatical function of the word or group of words. Always remember that minimum information principle. This is what will save you a lot of headache in the long run. And make sure that the language database you've created for yourself is also an accurate reflection of what you have already learned. Do not use it as a dumping ground for stuff that would be cool to learn. Trust me on this one, this is the voice of experience. I've done it the wrong way many times, and guess what? When you come across that sentence or that word you don't understand when you're doing Anki, you won't have time to learn it then. Once you've done an entry-level textbook series, you can move into a more intermediate level. Honestly, this is where I recommend digging into something like a Routledge grammar book if it exists for the language that you've chosen. You can find all sorts of great sample sentences and phrases here, stuff that is perfect for an Anki deck. As long as you remember to actually learn the material first and you focus on the minimum information principle, you'll be just fine. But you don't just want to learn out of the grammar book, especially when you're at like the beginning, intermediate stage, or whatever you want to call it. If you just learn from the grammar book here, you'll be bored to death. I mean, you just finished the textbooks before, right? Once you're up to this point, it's really good to find a hobby that you love and enjoy and can do in the language. Then go do it in that language. Now, naturally, I don't know what you're interested in. I do know, though, that language learning will be a lot more fun to you if you're doing something that you love to do in the language. And you should try to make friends with native speakers if it's possible. Now, you would be surprised. Most people are actually really happy to help you learn their native language. It's hard to speak it at first, and you will feel awkward. But when you get to know them, you feel more comfortable, the language will start coming more naturally to you. If you do this, you will make a lot more progress a lot faster than you would any other way. Anyway, keep in mind that you really ought to put in the groundwork before you start going after a massive project in your target language. If you want to read difficult classical literature, you can do it, and there's no problem with starting today. However, even in that case, you will need to get at least a grammatical foundation under your feet. You can do other things that will help you out a lot, especially at the intermediate level. Things like watching television in your target language. If you come across a script of whatever show it is you're watching, you can figure out ways to translate it. You could then cut the audio up using something like Audacity to create your own custom cards. Remember, though, that you want to keep your cards simple and easy. Stay away from anything that is long and
妈妈整
cumbersome.
理好了床铺。
And you know, it's going to be a lot easier to maintain a solid foundation if you use spatial recognition when you learn from the very beginning. Anyway, these are a couple tidbits and pointers that hopefully will help you as you develop your own language plan and your own strategy. Remember that you want to keep things fun, and especially that you want to keep them simple. Keep it fun and simple, and you will have success in the long term.